Welcome in. Thanks so much for joining me. So, today I'd like to discuss one of the Buddha's teachings on working with imperfection. So, we can see this in not only some of the core teachings of Buddhism, but we could just see it in life. We don't necessarily need a spiritual teaching or religion to point it out, though I find it helpful. I'm pretty dense. If I'll take help wherever I can get it. But we can see life is more or less imperfect. Things don't always work out. I would say, for me, they rarely work out the way I thought they would. And we have to experience various forms of discomfort that are just inevitable throughout life. The more I look at my life in this lens, just as a curiosity, not as something pessimistic, just the more I see these elements of how much I'm chasing perfection, how much I'm chasing things to be, quote unquote, right or good or, perfect. And it's not like this is always conscious. It's not like I'm thinking, I got to get this perfect. I'm not thinking that. But when I look at some of my actions, it seems to be that was the motivation, trying to make it perfect or exact. So I'm guessing some of you out there have the same issue or struggle with the same issue from time to time. Because, even though we can have some differences in our human life, and sometimes those differences can be quite large, I think this essential thing is not so different. The Buddha described this in one word. He used the word dukkha, Sanskrit and Pali word that it's not really translatable into one English word. Sometimes we use the word suffering or dissatisfaction or discontent. There's various words we've used, but really I think one of the ways we could sum it up is in a few words that life is imperfect. And initially, some people come across this teaching and think of it as a more pessimistic thing, like it's judging them or saying, you can't get what you want or something like that, or more like nihilistic, like quit. No, it's not meant like that at all. Or at least that's not my experience of it. I find it quite inspiring all these years. It can be painful at times to reflect on it, but I find it inspiring after many years of Dharma study and practice. Just because it's a truth that I've found to be true through my own process of experimentation. And as I said, trying to get things right or, trying to hold something in sort of permanence and it inevitably changes, trying to get things to be perfect, exactly how I want, etc. And, what follows quickly is disappointment and disillusionment. And I think that's actually where the nihilism or the depression and or, breaking down can happen, is when we're repeating the same thing again and again, and we're just repeatedly not getting what we want, and we start to get down with life. This happens to a lot of us, and it's not necessary, right? And this is kind of what I want to advocate for in this talk here, which is that we need to take responsibility for working with the imperfections of life. And for me, first, that means just acknowledging and becoming curious about these imperfections, becoming curious about, not just what goes on in the discomfort and dissatisfaction in our life, but others as well. And when we start to do that, we first start to deal with some grief, which is normal and natural. Maybe not everyone goes through that. I went through that, just some grief of that recognition or that truth, right? Because we're talking about a truth here, that meaning it for all human beings, this element is at play. I'm not saying you have to believe that, but that's been my conclusion after many years of reflection and a lot of pain, personal pain. But my point is that acknowledgement has a gift, because once we go through the grieving process of realizing, okay, maybe I can't exactly always get what I want, and I need to have some humility here, then we go through the process of working with imperfection. that's where I think the real juice is, right? So sometimes we have to grieve an old way of being. This applies to anything. We have to grieve an old way of being. We have to grieve an old way of behaving, or a relationship, or a dynamic, or whatever it is. And then something new can come, right? So grief, it can be very, very helpful in this way, because we actually finally can let something go and move to what's going to be more skillful. And in this case, I don't have an answer for making what's imperfect perfect. All I can say is that, I've grown a practice of trying to take more responsibility for meeting that imperfection. And, for me, that often means feeling my feelings, like allowing them to be heard, felt through different awareness and somatic practices I do. That becoming more of a regular habit. Of course, compassion is at play in that. Self-compassion, compassion for others, and more or less providing a space to continuously grieve imperfection, and then also to start to relate with it, to start to flow with another way of working. That, okay, if I don't assume this should work out in the way I want, what am I going to do? Because, I've already established the way our lives work generally, it doesn't work to do nothing. Like, that's not really what the teaching is saying, right? We just have to shift how we're working with things and why we're working with things. So a core principle here in Buddhism is when we center self-centered cherishing, basically, when we center that everything needs to revolve around me or you, and all good things should happen around that, it sort of amplifies the pain we receive and the dissatisfaction we receive from the natural imperfections of living. And so this is one of the main principles that we work with is letting go of that, coming more into connection with community, others, the world around us, starting to recognize there's other ways to be, working in imperfection with our relationships, in imperfection with the world around us. When we stop trying to make a perfect world, we start working with the world that is in front of us. I know for some of you, that's just a painful statement or could be a painful statement or recognition in and of itself, because often we're seeking something else than what's there. But what's here is what's here, and we need to work with it, right? With compassion, with wisdom, with skillful means. Of course, this by no means, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek to make change and to mitigate harm. Actually, we can mitigate harm and seek change through working with imperfection, right? That's part of what I'm saying. But it's changing from an ideal of, oh, I need to find some kind of utopian situation that's not this, to just working with that. So you're in the moment. You're leaping into an experience with your own emotions, your own reactions, the reactions, emotions of others, everything that's at play physically and emotionally, psychologically, and you're just in the mix. I used to call this kind of like being willing to get in the mud with the world, right? And so I think the trick is, how do we get in the mud, but we don't sort of get mired in it, and we get so dirty from the mud, we don't know what to do, and we lose ourselves in that. Basically, we become more self-centered, right? So this is a challenge. But I do think through taking responsibility for our life's imperfections, I don't mean like that there's some inherent imperfection to us. Maybe I should have said that earlier. Buddhism doesn't believe there's an innate imperfection to you or me or anyone, right? So there's not an innate flaw to fix. So there's just sort of what appears to be imperfections, right? What appears to be problems, what appears to be suffering. And that can be very real, right? Obviously. And so that's what we work with to recognize what we call our innate perfection in Buddha nature, in awakened mind, these kind of more deep-end principles of Buddhism that I encourage you to explore. But I think on a practical level, it still comes down to taking responsibility for how we work with imperfection. That's really what I'm saying. Not that we are imperfect or any of that or anyone else's. It's how are we working with it? How are we working with our relationship to that? And so I think another tip here that I found really helpful is creating a positive attitude around that rather than letting it bring us down, right? Or breaking us down. We let it break us open into compassion and a willingness, a courage to meet life, right? To meet life as it is. Of course, a meditation practice, other kind of principles of Buddha Dharma or our own spiritual practice can help us to do that, right? However we find that courage and confidence is really important because that then becomes the energy where we can approach something skillfully. It becomes that energy where we can approach something without breaking down. And instead we allow ourselves to break open with compassion, but that doesn't stop us from trying and working, right? So lastly, I'll just say, if this is kind of a new concept to you and, you're newer to these principles around Buddhism or just anything I'm saying, work with something really small, work with something really minor, like something that you would almost dismiss, like, oh, that's not a big deal. I need to find the thing that's a big deal. No, work with the thing that's just a little bit annoying or just a little bit nagging, right? That thing that you think is not a big deal, work with it. Try a new way of being with it, right? So there's a lot of practices you could find on my website, guided meditations, etc., where it's working with the feeling world, right? Working with meeting and being with things. This is another way to meet imperfection, just in the sense that, it's imperfect. It's because we don't want that. Like, we don't want something that's painful. So naturally, that's going to seem imperfect to us, right? And so we work with meeting our discomfort, right? But as I'm saying, work with something small. Start with something just very, very small, because you're going to have more success with that initially. Like, the success isn't that it goes away. The success is that you find the courage to meet that and work with it, right? That's what it means. That's what I'm saying. And when you feel that, it emboldens you in a positive way, where you feel even more courage and compassion. And then you can go on to meet more difficult things. And I really do think this is a necessary thing we need to be cultivating if we do want to see beneficial change in the world around us, right? If we allow the doom and gloom to kind of take us over and to occupy our mind and to break us down into pessimism and nihilism, this is probably the worst outcome, right? So we need to put energy into what we actually can work with, right? I'm not saying we can make some sort of utopian world. What I'm saying is we can work with the imperfection of the world. So that's what I'm advocating for. So again, this is just some things I work with, some things I find helpful. Sometimes I share it in classes and with people I mentor, and they find it useful. So if it's interesting to you, let me know. Drop me a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or you can reach out at my website, scotttusa.com. You can always reach out to me there and let me know. Also, let me know if you don't agree. It's not like you have to agree with this, right? But I like to hear from you. I like to hear what you're thinking here. So thanks so much, everyone. And wishing you well in working with your imperfections. All right, take care.